Hello, everybody, and welcome here to Wine with Jimmy. Thank you so much for stopping by. We've got quite a special guest on for this session. We have Peter, all the way from Rioja. How are you doing, Peter?
Hi, Jimmy. Doing great myself. How about you?
Fantastic. Really, really good. Now, to give you a bit of context, we're going to talk about Rioja. We're going to talk about Rioja and the Rioja Academy. It's something that I am very, very much fond of. And I did my ambassador's course out with Peter, I think probably back in November 22, potentially.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Which is great. So the whole point of this little discussion is to talk about Rioja as a whole, talk about the Rioja Academy, which my school, West London Wine School, delivers in the UK, amongst many other key institutions around the world, delivering it, bringing it to life. And so we're going to talk about some things and then some key topics around Rioja. So, Peter, would you be kind enough to introduce yourself, what you do, and maybe where you are in the world at the minute?
Yeah, so I'm currently based in Logroño, which is the capital of the La Rioja province in Spain, not to be confused with the Rioja wine region, but you'll learn all about that in Jimmy's course. And I work for the control board, the Consejo Regulador, as they say it in Spanish. So our aim is here to, on one hand, do controls of the wines, whether they meet the specifications, but also promote the regions through various activities and education. And the Rioja Wine Academy is one of those. So that's one of my projects, as you rightly mentioned.
And being such an integral person, in the formation, the foundation of the Rioja Academy, what's the reason behind creating such a course, such education? And could you sort of describe quickly, what it is, what it does, is it online and in person, etc., etc.?
Yes, so Rioja Wine Academy is basically a free online portal where you can learn all about Rioja and get an official certification from the control board. You can either access the platform directly as a student, but you can also take courses through one of our certified partners, such as you, and then you get the additional advantage of having classroom sessions, obviously tastings, which is something we cannot provide online, special guidance, all of which Jimmy fantastically provides because he's a certified Rioja educator. And so we have this system that we typically twice every year we bring people here to get the educator certification so that they can also teach about Rioja. Rioja Wine Academy was founded before I came here, so I actually started working for a DO in 22, but it was actually founded back in 2020, actually in the midst of COVID. It was actually planned before, but it was launched, if I'm not mistaken, February or March 2020. It was like an immediate success, perfect storm. People were at home, they had nothing to do, and free online Rioja course, I'll do that. So I have to give credit to the board for creating this project. I think it's important to have a good educational platform with information directly from the source that's trusted. Something that maybe for other wine regions, classic wine regions, there's perhaps a bit more information out there that you can teach yourself about via books or study programs. For Rioja, there was really something lacking there. So we created a special program or platform for that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I loved obviously coming out to Rioja and being immersed in the gastronomy, the culture, the wine, the people. It was fantastic. And I think that's so important in order to deliver really high-end, engaging education. It's very important that you put stock in ambassadors, certified educators, How many courses have you done now? How many people have you brought out to Rioja? So how many certified educators are there, do you think, now in the world?
Well, over the educator program started actually before we had the online platform. So there was already this vision that we wanted to have some people that could teach about Rioja, that we could also, when we were doing campaigns in specific countries, that could help us in educational activities. So if you add everything up since the very start, which was, I think, in 2016, but I have to look it up, I think we have around 200 certified educators in 30-something countries. So it's really giving us a network worldwide. Obviously, we focus on countries that are important to us, where, for example, we have a good export value. UK is definitely number one there. But it's really quite broad. Also countries that where there's an opportunity for people to learn about Rioja. So I'm always looking for qualified people such as yourself that can teach about Rioja with enthusiasm.
Yeah. And we're going to talk a little bit, Peter. So the course, of course, is fantastic. Each institution adapts it to their market and puts their kind of experience into it. I wanted to talk to you a little bit because now I've ran the Rioja Academy at West London Wine School. It was really fascinating to have some real good discussions with students around certain topics. And I loved bringing that to life within my presentations, delivering the Rioja Academy. So some of those questions I want to pose to you, because it'd be really great for people that are thinking about doing the Rioja Academy in person with people like me at West London Wine School, to get an idea of kind of what topics might be discussed. And one of those that we actually discussed a lot on my last online course was around, of course, the really, and excuse my pun, but the hot topic at the minute, which is around climate change or climate chaos, as you know, Tim Atkin puts it in that speech. What do you think is happening in Rioja at the minute? Is it being impacted by climate change? And how do you think it's adapting, both with the Consejo Regulador and growers, wine styles? What could you tell us around climate change?
Well, yeah, it's important to first of all take a step back and understand the climate of Rioja, which obviously you will also learn through the course. But we are in this unique position that we combine actually three climates in Spain. So Spain has three main climates. There's an Atlantic climate in the north, quite wet and cold. There's a continental climate in the center, quite cold in winter, hot and dry in summer. And then there's a Mediterranean climate on the east coast, much more moderated, warm, some drought issues there as well, as in all over Spain. But we combine those three climates, so they actually come together in this unique place. Rioja get some Mediterranean influences through the Ebro River Valley. We have some Atlantic influences, but not too much, because we have a mountain chain there, the Sierra de Cantabria, and we get some continental influences there as well. So all of that comes together, and actually vintage variation has always been part of Rioja. This climate chaos, and is now it's a bigger word, but let's say there was already like the fact that we have these different climates, every year is different, and so on. Obviously, in general, it's getting warmer, but Rioja is still somewhat benefiting from the fact that it has those moderating effects. But if you look at 2022 to 2023, those were very warm, also very dry. 24 was wetter, actually, certainly before and during the harvest, which is also not always a great thing. But like the general trend is indeed that it's a warming climate. In Rioja, there is a few things that can help us in a certain way. The first one is altitude. I was talking about these mountain change, Sierra de Cantabria, Sierra de la Demanda. We have vineyards today up to 900 meters of altitude, so that's really an option to look for more cooler vineyards up in altitude. There are also cooler zones, for example, in the foothills of the Sierra de la Demanda, which is actually north facing, and it's an area where it's typically colder, where it rains a lot, and where in the past people were harvesting in November. Now that's all shifted forward. But for example, there was Garnacha grown, which was not getting always ripe and was used for clarete style, but now you have beautiful Garnachas that are getting just ripe in that area. So there are, in a certain way, in those areas, Rioja has actually benefited from climate change, you could say, but in other areas, not that much. And certainly with a grape variety as Tempranillo, which is early ripening, that can be an issue. So in that sense, we are also looking at other varieties which we have approved within the appellation and which are getting more interest, things like Garnacha, Graciano, Mazuelo, which are all late ripening varieties, also more resistant to drought, to a hot climate. So those varieties are getting more and more attention. So those are some of the elements. Also old vines, actually 30% of the Rioja appellation is planted with vines over 35 years old, which according to the OIV are considered old vines. And those old vines, they also have advantages in terms of better developed root systems, being more resistant. So that's also something that can help us. And then maybe a final point is just like risk mitigation in general. I mean, Rioja being such a large appellation, 66,000 hectares, as I was saying, we have you have the opportunity to have vineyards in different sites, different grape varieties, and the famous aspect of blending also comes in there, right? So you can use blending to your advantage to use some of these varieties that have a bit more natural acidity, that are grown in zones that are a bit cooler. And yes, wine styles are also changing. I mean, we've seen in 22, 23 hotter vintages, wines are more fruit forward. They're not always a bad thing. They're more immediately accessible. I also think sometimes you should not try to hide the effect of a vintage. Sometimes the vintage is just what it is, and that's the name of the game.
Yeah, I say that in many classes. Certainly when vintage discussions are very intense. Let's just take the stereotypical like Bordeaux, for example, and people, will come into a class and go, 2017 was a terrible vintage. It was just too cold, too wet. And it's like, well, you don't say that. What we say is that those wines, if they're well made, which many of them will be wines that will be drunk sooner, and they will satisfy our thirst quicker, rather than the wines that are going to be long lived. You mentioned that, of course, Garnacha is one of the varieties which is being more focused on. If you go back 50 years, Garnacha was, 45-50% of the vineyard area. Do you think it's going to become a savior for Rioja in the future? It's not going to get back to that number again, but are we going to see more Garnacha as a percentage? I know there's been a stop on plantation recently in the next few years, but do you think Garnacha will be allowed to sneak up to some higher numbers as Tempranillo maybe curtails a little bit?
I think that's a realistic option. Yes, I think it's a variety that first of all, as I mentioned, is quite adapted to a more warmer climate. Also, the profile of Garnacha is very much let's say in vogue with consumer taste that are looking for perhaps more fruity, drinkable wines, less tannins, more fluid, sappy profile. So Garnacha is well suited for that. As you rightly say, we are not planting more vineyards today because I think the general market is not there. But what is happening is that there are people reconverting existing vineyards to other varieties, to white varieties, which are also gaining in importance. And it's probably realistic that there are vineyards going to disappear, going to be removed. And we recently, within the as part of the control board, we discussed this, or the stakeholders, the main stakeholders discussed this. And one of the key points there, if we are going to take out vineyards, the focus should be on Tempranillo vineyards, which are planted in very fertile zones, which are not always giving the best wines. So to keep the best vineyards, the best grape varieties, to keep them around. And in that sense, yes, percentually speaking, Garnacha might grow, and maybe even in absolute numbers as people start replanting.
Yeah. And obviously with Tempranillo's domination, 90% and so on in terms of red production, it's going to need to be the one that gets targeted in that way, right? If there is going to be overproductive areas on fertile soils and so on. Peter, you mentioned the hot, dry 22 vintage, 23 vintage. Interestingly, the recent vintage of 2024 is being classed as possibly the lowest crop level for 25 years. Could you discuss just a little bit more why that is the case? What were the kind of weather conditions in place, and was there adverse weather, or was it just wet? Was there disease pressure? What was the challenges of the 2024?
Yeah, lots of challenges. As you rightly pointed out, we came out of two hot vintages. That means also that the plants were having less reserves on their own. So that's already something you get into as a start. Luckily, in the beginning of 24, there was some replenishment. There was a bit of rain. The other thing is that getting into 24, we already knew that in general the market for red wine was not growing anymore. So we decided also from a control board to reduce the yields to 90% of what they usually are. And then there were also, that's not something that's coming from the control board, but more from the local government. There were subsidies for green harvesting. So if you decided actually not to harvest any fruit this year, that's a decision that has to be made up in advance. You get like a fee to compensate your loss, and quite some people, well, quite some. There was also an effect on that. Let's say it like that. So those factors getting into the vintage were also that 90% reduce and the green harvest was already. We were already aiming, in fact, for a less productive vintage. But then several things happened. On top of that, on the 19th of April, there was a quite big frost, which affected like 4,000 to 5,000 hectares, if I'm not mistaken. But in some areas, it certainly had its effect. We also didn't have the best weather, but that's not atypical, I should say, during fruit set. So again, we were not. That was already shaping up to be a harvest that was lesser in volume, but the quality up until that point was still promising to be very good, because the weather conditions were a lot more balanced than the previous years. So up until, I would say, September, people were really excited about the quality, not so much about the quantity. I even remember speaking to Maria Jose Lopez de Heredia, who was telling me it was looking like a 64 vintage to her, which is like an iconic vintage in Rioja. But yes, then in the second part or middle of the harvest, we had quite some rain in September, October. So then, yes, things were getting a little bit more difficult with problems of rot. So people had to be even more selective, and all of that combined gave a much lower harvest, 2,075 million kilograms harvested, while Rioja has the potential to do 400 million kilos in a good harvest. So a significant reduction because of all of those factors. That being said, I think the people that were selective will be able to produce good wines. I've tasted quite a bit of 24 already here in the tasting panel, and especially the whites are promising to be very good, because most of the whites were harvested before the rain. Mm-hmm. For the reds, it will depend. People that have been selective will also be able to produce great wine. So yes, challenging. But in general, like the way the market is, it's not such a bad thing to have a little bit of a down vintage. Of course, it's not great for the growers. Those are the ones that are suffering the most from this. So I feel for them. But okay, this sometimes happens that you have a vintage like that. Certainly in Rioja.
Yeah, and it needs to be a part of the financial planning, doesn't it, for a grower, that you will have bountiful crops, and then you'll need to make sure that you have enough in reserve financially for when there's a difficult vintage. And then, of course, with the subsidies you mentioned of green harvesting, there hopefully would be some leeway there. One thing you mentioned about the 24 vintage, because you've been tasting quite a lot with the control board, is the quality of the whites. And I think this has probably been my most inspiring section of Rioja, is the whites. And on the Rioja Academy, when we're teaching it, when we taste through 27, 28 wines, I totted up the numbers of all the wines that we tried, and it was about half and half. So I was showing about half white and about half red in there, with a few rosés as well. And that possibly is to do with the fact there's a big list of white grape varieties. I wanted to show all of those, but also there's a lot of excitement. I was really, really excited to show real traditional Rioja, like Tondonia, more modernista, like Allende, and then more kind of precise, salty styles, like Sierra de Torronia, for example, or, there's a real diversity that's now being found. Is that what you found as well with white Rioja? And do you think it is living up to the monikers, like with Tim Atkins and Jancis Robinson calling it, sometimes as fine as white Burgundy? Do you find that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And you made some great points there. And I think diversity is really the key word for Rioja, not just for the whites, but in reds you can find equal diversity. Rioja is not all about American oak aged Tempranillo. There's so many different styles, and certainly also within whites, as you rightly point out. It's a super exciting region for white wines. So you have really those 9 varieties that you can work with. You have the same diversity as I was saying before in terms of the regions, amplitude, altitude, different ways to classify your wines, and you can do all of that in white wines, and I think it's super exciting.
And you just mentioned a little bit about classification as well. This was also quite interesting for the students of my last course, because there is, in the last 7 or 8 years, been a very strategic move to reclassify parts of Rioja in terms of the village and single vineyard level. Now, this is 7 or 8 years in. Have we found it expanding, and is it being accepted by consumers? And is there anything going to be changing about it? Are producers also welcoming the viñedos singulares?
Yeah, I think this is one of the examples where you can also see that little things that you do as a control board, changing regulations, can have an impact, and can also can encourage wineries and growers to start looking into this. And actually the same happens for white grape varieties. For white wines, it was in 2008 that we changed the regulations to include 6 new varieties, some of them recently here rediscovered, others a bit more international. But that has really given a big impact to white wines. In the last 10 years, the sales of Rioja white wines doubled, and currently Rioja is the 2nd white wine appellation of Spain. Few people actually realize that. So that's just an indication of how, as a control board, you can make changes to regulations that also adapt to the market and are then really having an impact. And the same happened really with what you just mentioned, the whole classification aspect. Rioja historically has been a region of wineries. Each winery is having their own style. Indeed, oak aging was a big part of defining that style, blending as well. But I think currently there's a bit of a trend of what I call unblending, like people looking at individual components of their wines, whether it be individual grape varieties, individual parcels, and vinifying those on their own. That also has to do with younger generation having traveled and having seen this worked in other parts of the world. In Spain in general, there's also other regions looking into this. Priorat, Bierzo, Cava, they're also looking into classifying their land, and we've done the same thing, and we've come up with a 3-tier classification, which is Vinos de Zona, so you can put your zone on your label: Rioja Alta, Rioja Alavesa, Rioja Oriental. Jimmy will teach you all about it in his course. What are the differences between these three regions? You can put the village on your label, so that's giving more identity to certain villages, because we have some key villages here in Rioja that I think should be known to wine lovers, but are not always as well known as in some other regions where villages play a more important role. And then you have the Viñedo Singular, which is the top of the pyramid, which is single vineyard wines, a bit like a Grand Cru, you could say, in Burgundy. The difference being that it's very politically difficult to start classifying parcels from a control board, because there's always going to be disputes. Just look at things that are happening in Bordeaux when they come up with a new classification. So what we have done is actually given the opportunity to wineries or growers to say, well, I think this parcel deserves to be a Viñedo Singular. You have to present a dossier, a file, to say that this is a unique vineyard. It has to be at least 35 years old. It has to be lower yields. And then you can actually put Viñedo Singular on your label. It also has to pass a tasting panel, by the way, so it's also a quality guarantee for a consumer. And I think in the same way that has given an impulse to those wines. There are how many are there now? 160 something. I forgot the number from the top of my head. Single vineyard parcels, and more than 200 wines. 40 of which are white, by the way. So again, this has given an impulse. And even if some bodegas are not following the official classification, maybe it has also developed an interest for them to make single vineyard wines, even if they don't use the classification. But it's just like, again, giving an impulse to this part of the market. And I think it's worked really well. And I think there are some great single vineyard wines on the market now. It was getting. This change was made in 2017, and in the beginning, like when the news came first out, people were saying, "Well, we want to try these wines, but they're not in our market." But little by little, that's happening now, and I think also in UK, when you do your sessions, you don't have problems nowadays to find a few options for Viñedo Singular.
No, exactly. I think we used 5 on the last course, so you get ample opportunity to try white Garnacha, 100% high altitude, and Tempranillo blends, etc. It's really exciting because it talks very heavily about terroir, specific location. The villages was very fascinating as well, because of course there's bigger emphasis on single vineyards, so Viñedos Singulares, but I think villages, when I put this quite interactive map up in my presentation, where I discussed each of the key villages and talking to people about the likes of Alfaro, for example, right down in the southeast, and then of course classics like Briones and La Guardia, La Bastida, and Son Sierra, and etc. But it's really fascinating. Show them a picture of the beauty of that village, talk a bit about how many vineyards are there, some classic names, some Viñedos Singulares, and people are really get a good feel for it. So you see single vineyards, you see villages more increasingly. The ones that are difficult to find, Peter, maybe you can answer this question, is the zones. It doesn't seem that many label with the zones yet. It's either Rioja, that's it, right? Or villages and single vineyards. Is that the case, or are you seeing more sort of people saying Rioja Alta or Rioja Alavesa or Rioja Oriental?
I do know quite a bit of examples, but I mean, Rioja is still the base name is still very well known.
Yeah.
I think you probably the one you see most is Rioja Alavesa. That's probably the one that you'll see most. Also has this unique profile, Basque part. So Basque people are quite proud of their region, also want to put it on a label. But yeah, it's more and more it's getting. Maybe Rioja Oriental is a little bit more difficult to find. That one, I agree.
Maybe because producers still call it Baja because they have done forever. You mentioned, of course, there's the terroir, the beauty of the land and the people behind these wines. I know that the Consejo created a geological map. Is there any updates that they will be releasing that detailed map anytime soon? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Not that I'm aware of. It's not as easy. I mean, in broad scope, we understand the different layers and parts but there's a lot of kind of once you get into the details, it's not a simple task. I mean, people always talk about soil maps of say Barolo, which has a great soil map, but Barolo is 2,000 hectares. Rioja is 66,000 hectares. Only San Vicente on its own, you could make a soil map as detailed of Barolo because it's the same size. So this is not such an easy task. Also, I think most people through history, through experience, have learned where the great vineyards are. It's not that La Tâche was planted based on a soil map. I think if we're looking at Burgundy, these parcels were planted, and through winemaking, people saw, wow, this parcel is really special. And here we have a lot of that experience. Also, certainly the growers, the bodegas, they know where the best parcels are, and it's even exciting to see. Did a tasting 2 weeks ago with some of the best wines of Rioja, and even some classic bodegas that are well known for their blends. They're starting to show an interest in kind of this single vineyard wines because they know that they have great parcels that historically perhaps they put it their Grand Reserva, but now they say, well, let's make a wine out of this, and they can be gorgeous wines. I tasted 3 examples of these 2 weeks ago that were really fantastic, that I wouldn't have expected from such a big winery that you think they have this classic wines and are going to stick with it, but also they are slowly showing an interest in this terroir driven concept.
Thanks, Peter. And you mentioned in the green room before that it's a rather big year this year, right? It's the 100-year anniversary of the Consejo. Big celebrations then in foot. Would you mind sharing any kind of thing happening for the 100th centennial of Rioja for maybe people out there that would like to get involved?
Yes, so we are the oldest wine region of Spain. The first official document was signed on the 6th of June 1925. So this year we're officially turning 100 years. One thing we want to show as part of this 100-year anniversary is kind of that Rioja is still very dynamic today, because you can look at a region that's 100 years old and think it's like, wow, it's old, it's dusted, but you know just as well as me that Rioja is very exciting. All of the things we've talked about today. Even Andreas Kubak, Master of Wine, he calls Rioja the most exciting emergent wine region of Spain. For a region of 100 years old, that's quite a statement to make, but that's just kind of a bit over exaggerating the whole thing. But yes, we want to say, like, yes, we're turning 100 years, but we've actually always been pioneers, right? We were the first to start with barrel aging. We were the first to start with the Crianza, Reserva, Gran Reserva classifications, etc., etc. And we want to kind of demonstrate that pioneering role. What we are going to do, we're going to do a lot of activities all over the world, certainly in our home country. On that day, or actually the day before the first document was signed, the 5th of June, there's going to be a big celebrational institutional event here that even a member of the royal family will come over. All the main stakeholders will be there.
King, no less.
Yes, we're expecting the king. So that's exciting. But also in different countries, you'll see we have this new logo, which we have behind me to highlight the 100 years. We'll do different tastings, definitely in UK, different activities in all of our countries. This theme will be weaved into our marketing campaign, and then we'll also bring people here. So we're looking at fall time frame to do something more, an international event here. So I cannot give all the details yet, but it's going to be a busy year for us.
Wonderful. Well, great. Thank you so much, Peter. I've got a couple more things, very quick things. Are you still fond of horses?
Very much so.
Great. And secondly, please, anybody ask away, ask questions about that. It's a really interesting story with Peter and horses. I know you have to be as impartial as possible because, of course, your position with the Consejo Regulador. But could you probably say, at the minute, could you name 3 producers that you are really people should really be looking out for? Because this can be globally, because this video will go out globally. So, is there anybody you would like to sort of shout out about producer-wise, or maybe, I don't know, if you can't be that because you need to be impartial, maybe styles or something like that?
Yeah, it's a bit difficult for me to, well, first of all, because of impartialism, it's difficult for me to name 3, but it's also difficult to just limit it down to 3, even if we were having a private conversation, because there are so many great producers here. I'm lucky to have the opportunity to taste a lot here. Like I said, it's always exciting when new things are happening, like existing producers doing new things or new projects being started. So that's always exciting for me to taste. But also something really classic. Like I was saying, we were doing this big tasting a few weeks ago, and we tasted some wines across all categories. And one category that I think is very much under the radar, and we also touched upon, is Gran Reserva white wines. I think they are some of the greatest wines in the world. It's a really unique style, and they're not always as oxidative as people think. You mentioned Tondonia. Since you mentioned them, I'll mention them as well. But which is obviously a great wine, but it's a very much oxidative style. But you have also these other producers that are much more looking for not all that oxidative, more like balance, elegance in those wines. So I think that's really a category that of all the wines that we tasted there, I think that's a category that really deserves attention. And there are more and more of these Gran Reserva. It's not like 1 or 2 producers that are making them. It's really a very exciting category.
Thank you. I know that was a tough question to answer, so thank you for that. Cool. Well, great. So much information there, Peter. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your enthusiasm about all things Rioja, and in fact all things La Rioja as well. It's a real interesting discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are watching, there is of course a forthcoming courses at West London Wine School for the Rioja Academy. Both Peter and myself wholeheartedly recommend them. I have a whale of a time, love teaching them. Of course, you get to taste a huge amount of wines, nearly 30 in the course. The information about this is in the description below this video. Please do go and check it out because they are fantastic. And then you will, of course, be officially a Rioja Diploma candidate. No, not a candidate. You will pass your Rioja Diploma, I suppose. That's what happens at the end of it, which is exceptionally exciting. And maybe, who knows, you might get excited. You might get invited to the 100 celebrations as well if you're a part of that group. Peter, any closing remarks from you?
No, I would just encourage everyone to sign up for the classes. Jimmy is a great teacher. You'll learn a lot from him, and you'll have a great time for sure. And maybe he'll tell you about the horses.
Great, brilliant. Thank you very much.